Oh yeah. Sorry about that, everyone. Very first time, I knew something was going to happen. So my name is John Carlson. I'm here tonight to talk about one of my favorite animals. I'm not sure if it's my favorite because there's so many to choose from, but this is definitely my favorite animal that I can go out and access right away to take pictures of and count on it. Unlike like a black bear where, I can't really count on taking pictures of that. So this is my favorite animals and we'll get right into it. All right, here's some basic stuff. Timber rattlesnakes, first of all, they're highly venomous pit vipers. They have both hemotoxic and myotoxic venom. That means it attacks both the blood and the muscle tissue. They're heavy-bodied. They're probably the heaviest bodied snake in the Northeast and right on down until eastern diamondbacks become the biggest snake. And they average between 3 and 4 feet in length. It's not out of the question though to see one around 5 feet, and I've seen a couple like that, but they're out there. They're not common. Okay, here's a map of the timber rattlesnake range. All right, everything in red is where they used to live, and everything in green is kind of where they live still. If you notice up here in New England, they're basically wiped out everywhere in New England. Even this over here, if you can see Connecticut, this green stripe going through. Really, there's only one little island in the middle and a little bit in the northwest corner. So even this is exaggerated. Here's a look at Maryland. Okay, the area with the green hash mark, the gray hash marks, but in the white background is the historical range where they used to live. Most of these wiped out with by development and hunters. And the yellow area over here is where they still exist. And this is the Appalachian Range. And the Appalachian Range is pretty much the safe haven for rattlesnakes, right up to the northern Appalachians, all the way down south into the Carolinas and Georgia. Here's some physical traits. Physical traits of timber rattlesnake. Specialized traits include sensory pits. The sensory pit is located kind of between the eye and the nostril. If you can see my cursor over here. And these pits are aligned with special sensory cells. And these cells help the snake project infrared or heat vision, which helps them detect prey primarily, but also to identify threats. And also, all rattlesnakes have elliptical pupils like a cat. And this is to aid with their nocturnal function. Most rattlesnakes are active during the night, during the warmer months when they hunt. And they have a forked tongue, like all snakes. And the forked tongue is basically picks up little bits of scent, and it's carried into an organ called the Jacobson's organ, which is right inside here. And it's basically just like picking up particles and smelling them. And of course, the fangs. Our timber rattlesnakes have fangs that could measure up to 1 inch. They're long and they're also hinged, meaning that they're so long that they have to fold back. So that they fold back, and when a snake opens its mouth, the fangs spring open. Otherwise, the snake would end up puncturing the lower part of its mouth, didn't have that hinged fang. So this is an example of what a rodent might look like to a rattlesnake using its eyes along with its infrared pits. So this is a great aid. So sometimes the animal is a little bit camouflaged, like a furry little brown mouse. But with the heat vision, they can see it as clear as day, as you can see here. So here's a video, a little bit of a close-up of a timber rattlesnake. It's checking out my GoPro. So I set up the GoPro there, and I'm right behind it, like less than a foot behind it, like you can hear me breathing. And I want you to pay attention to the snake's demeanor, even though I'm right behind it. Well, let this go right here. And excuse me about the pictures. I take pictures while I do the video. Notice the pits, those holes sticking out on the sides. And when they're really curious or really threatened, the tongue will flicker out longer and faster. So the snake's really interested. And that was the little rattle. That was about all it gave me. And what it's interested here is the heat signature of the GoPro. Not only is the GoPro small, but that and the heat signature, it might look like a rodent. And the snake is basically ignoring them right behind it, or right in front of it. Notice the belly scales. They're always white, even on the black phase ones. This thing's right now is right on top of the GoPro, checking it out. And to me, it's amazing to have a peaceful interaction with the snake that so many people fear. And that's one of the things I want to impress upon people tonight is how they're potentially dangerous, but their behavior isn't that dangerous. So that's how calm timber rattlesnakes can be, even with a human right there. It was a wonderful experience. All right, here's some more about physical traits. Of course, the signature rattle. The rattle is made out of keratin. All right, keratin and the skin is also made out of keratin. And it's also the same stuff that human hair and fingernails are made out of. Notice the scales are rough looking. All right, that's called keeled scales. It looks like the bottom of a boat. That's why they're called keeled. And it gives it a very rough appearance compared to a ringneck snake or a black racer. Another unusual feature, at least in America, is that the top of the head is covered with lots of tiny scales. All right, all of our non-venomous snakes, our copperheads, our cottonmouths, pygmy rattlesnakes, and Massasogas all have large plate scales. It's just timber rattlesnakes and eastern diamondbacks and in the eastern United States that have a head with tiny scales like that. And the head, like many venomous snakes or vipers, pit vipers, the head is very distinct from the neck. That's because right here is where the venom glands sit. All right, here's a little sample of rattling. Rattlesnake rattling is something that it's hard to get used to. It can be very unnerving at first, especially if there's numerous snakes or you don't know where the rattling one is. And it's something you never really get over, but you kind of do. That's the third rattlesnake. So we have two here, and there's another one. So notice how the rattle undulates in slow motion. So there's no noise, no rattle in there. There's no ball or bead shake around. So it's kind of a misnomer to call it a rattlesnake. Really, what makes the noise is the segments clicking against each other as it rattles side to side. Here's an example of a rattlesnake jaw, timber rattlesnake jaw. You can see the fangs. Again, they're large, they're hollow. Right over here, you can see the grooves right here is where the venom goes through. You know, it's not visible on the backside, is that it looks exactly like a hypodermic needle, just a little groove, and that's where the venom is injected into a prey or a threat. And again, they're hinged, and they're also replaceable. So if a snake loses a fang, a new one will grow. And occasionally a snake can be seen with actually two sets of fangs, with the old one still in place and the new one there as well. All right, I'm going to show a little video of a rattlesnake striking in slow motion. Before I do though, I just want to say I've only been struck at a handful of times. Most of those times were doing conservation work and extracting them, pulling them out from the rock, so to speak. Where they had at that point, you have to expect a snake to strike. This one right here is probably the only one that wasn't involving conservation work. And what happened here is this snake is caught out in the open. It's far away from its rock and has nowhere to go. And I startled it. And what happened is it struck at my GoPro while the GoPro was in my hand. So I came real close. But I want you to also pay attention to what the snake does afterwards. And this is typical of what a snake really wants to do. All right, see, just like any animal and pretty much every time a rattlesnake strikes it only when it has to, but it really just wants to get away. And if it can get away without striking, it do that every time. All right, rattlesnake coloration. Two rattlesnakes have two basic color phases, yellow and black, but there's considerable variance with each. But all of them have velvety black tails. Matter of fact, I believe on the nickname, so is a velvet tail for timber rattlesnakes. Okay, here's some yellow phases. The one on the left over here is typical of the lowland hilly areas, usually high contrast, kind of pretty colors. While this one on the right is a mountain rattlesnake, rustic, ruddy, low contrast, not much, really kind of a little ugly almost. Let me explain the pattern. The pattern is there serves a purpose. The background color is this tan, serves as the ground color when the snake's under bushes hiding. And the yellow works good because the light passes to the leaves, it comes out yellow. All right, and these dark shades over here represent the shadows of the leaves underneath, on top, shining down, putting a shadow on the snake. And the white flashes that you see will be the sunlight shining through. And if you look at the pictures of rattlesnakes at the bushes, you can see exactly the shadow patterns. You can see blotches where the leaves are, and you can see slashes of light that looks just like this. And black phase as well. Here we have a almost completely black individual. These are both mountain rattlesnakes. And another high contrast variation of black phase. Again, it's marked the same way and for the same purpose as the yellow one. You know, the lighter brown color, the dark shadows, and the white representing sunlight flashing through the bushes. Both are, I always wondered about what one was the best camouflage, but I think they're really both equally good, maybe in different situations. I don't know if you can see the yellow phase right here. Even though it's yellow, it blends in good with the brown tan leaves. That's maybe because of the spattering of green around. But it's easy, it would be easy to walk right past the snake. And over here on the right, we have a black phase buried underneath the grass in a way that makes it just look like a shadow. So snakes like this on the side of a trail, like along the Appalachian Trail, can be dangerous. Matter of fact, this is right on the side of a trail where someone could just step on it. But even then, they generally just try to get away. So this is the general kind of habitat that timber rattlesnakes like to use. Rugged, hilly, mountainous, mostly forested areas with at least some openings for basking, which is essential, especially in the mountains. All right, in general, timber rattlesnakes like to use mixed hardwood or pine hardwood forests with at least some ledges and rocky slopes. And this is an example. You can see down below is mostly open forest. This is where they would spend their time hunting. Up here, It's this is early spring, so there's no leaves yet. But these bushes are all scrub oak. These make excellent cover, and the rattlesnakes love them. So they can hide in the rocks, so they can come out and bask and get some sun. When it gets a little too warm, they can go into the scrub oak or go back into the rocks. This is perfect area for them. This area is typically area that they'd be hunting on, foraging at. These are usually in the bottom areas or the top areas where it's flat. They generally don't do their hunting on the slopes. They like a certain amount of berry bushes, but not an overwhelming amount, because if they're in a bunch of stuff in their way, their senses, their pit, infrared, their eyes, all this stuff is obstructing their vision. So they like to have a little bit, but not much. They really love having rocks around, down trees like that over here. You can see some over here. They like to line themselves up around those trees to wait for rodents to come running on top of them. Rattlesnakes use, besides, overall they use forest habitat most of the season. That's where most of the snakes are. But they also use micro habitats during part of the season. A microhabitat is just a small area of habitat that's different from the predominant. So an example of that would be an exposed ledge surrounded by forest. That ledge would be a microhabitat because generally it's different, it's exposed. It's probably totally different from the forest floor. The dens, the Hibernaculum, where rattlesnakes spend their winters, are found on ledges and steep slopes. All right, that's another type of microhabitat that they need to survive. And they share their dens with other snakes, copperheads, black racers, rat snakes, garter snakes, water snakes, milk snakes. Another microhabitat that they like to use they need is the exposed rock basking sites. Those serve multi-purpose functions. They go to the basking sites when they want to shed, or after a meal, they want the warmth helps them digest, and especially for incubating and birthing. So here's an example of a talus den or hibernaculum. Talus is simply pieces of rock that fall off or break off a ledge, and after hundreds of years, the rock builds up into a loose pile of rock. So we have a bit of ledge, and then at the bottom of the ledge will be a slope consisting of all the broken off rock that has accumulated. And often there are bigger pieces, as you see these boulders. Often the boulders have holes underneath them, and that's where the snakes will get into the talus to hibernate. And here's an example. So here's a boulder that's covered like around and on top with talus bits. But we have this hole here that's perfect. This goes right under the talus, below the frost line. And this is a den entrance right here for rattlesnakes, copperheads, racers. They all use this hole right here. Another kind of den that they like to use is a ledge hibernaculum. And they usually have horizontal openings that they usually use. And you can see all these horizontal fractures. The rattlesnakes will use the ones that go in deep enough to get below the frost line. This den is actually in Rhode Island, and it was wiped out maybe 100 years ago. And it's called Rattlesnake Ledge, even though there's no rattlesnakes any longer. This is my favorite kind of hibernaculum just because it's the most low key. It's a rocky slope hibernaculum. And it's basically just a pile of rocks covered in dirt and debris over the years. So it looks like just a hill, but it's really just a big rock pile. The problem is that over the years, a lot of the entranceways get covered up and blocked with leaves. So a lot of the main entrances are usually under the boulders. So you can see some of these boulders here. Not only do the boulders protect the holes from getting plugged up, if you look underneath them, it's like totally clean underneath there, like someone vacuumed. But it also provides protection. And moreover, these don't look like much. A talus slope or a ledge, a rattlesnake hunter might spot those a mile away. But something like this doesn't look like much at all. These are my favorite for that reason. Here's an example of a pretty much perfect basking site. This is on the western edge of the Appalachians in New York, and it's an ocean of scrub oak. You can't see these with scattered openings, and the openings really can't be seen without a drone or using satellite footage. And it's so thick, I don't even think a bear could get through there. So this is pretty much how rattlesnakes like their rookeries to be in the basking areas. First of all, we have a cluster of rocks with multiple entrances. Entrance here, entrance here, entrance here. All around here, all entrances. And the way these rocks are stacked up, there's a nice area with low, where there's only a few inches of headroom where they can get where it's tight. But it also, these areas are starting to stand up, form a chute that's a couple feet deep, where it's like a courtyard where it's open and snakes can gather. So the snakes come out, they can bask on top of this rock, which they often do. You see the camera right there. They can lay out in the grass where they have a little bit of camouflage at least. When it gets warm, they go into these scrub oak bushes. Or if they get disturbed, they could do that as well. So I'm going to show you the next slide is the inside of the chute right here where this camera is facing. I took this picture last week at the same location. There's a half dozen rattlesnakes right here in this opening spot, but there's also at least another half dozen in the close area where the rock it only leaves like a couple inches underneath. And this is probably the case in all in the Appalachian Mountains in Maryland. If you like look in the satellite view and just look for little openings in the forest on the top of the ledges. If there's rocks there, there's going to be rattlesnakes there. That's how I find. Like from Rhode Island, I can find rattlesnakes in New York 3 or 4 hours away just by looking at the map. You can fill these little holes on top of the mountaintops and ridges, and I check them for rocks. And if there's rattlesnakes, there's rocks, there's rattlesnakes. Here's another type of basking site, but it's not as favorable. This is a border fall site. And the problem with this is there's no vegetative cover. So the snakes could either hide under the rocks, so they can bask out in the open in the rocks, or they can go out over away from their hiding hole into the vegetation and take a risk. So this is kind of a second-rate kind of thing. But in some areas, that's only kind of basking sites that are exposed and available. So they'll use those where they have to, where there's none like the one I just showed you. Of course, like every animal, rattlesnakes have an important role in the ecosystem. All right, and like any animal, you take a rattlesnake out of there, it's going to cause a problem for the whole ecosystem. And they fill the role of both predator and prey. Common predators are raptors, red-tailed hawks, a big one where I live. Snakes, black racers are the notorious one. Where you live, you probably have king snakes in Maryland. They're notorious. And also carnivorous mammals, coyotes, fox, fishers, bobcats. Other animals are known to kill rattlesnakes too, but without eating them. White-tailed deer and wild turkey have been observed just stomping them. So they sense the danger, I suppose, and they kill them on sight sometimes. Okay, here's a prey example of a prey. Eastern chipmunk, good size for the average timber rattlesnake. The largest of them can take a gray squirrel, but most of them can't. They most stick to mice and chipmunks or red squirrels, maybe. Here's the white-footed mouse, the most common prey. And this is a good thing because the white-footed mouse is also the primary host for the bacterium that causes Lyme disease. So we want these mice to be eaten. The red-tailed hawk, one of the main predators around here in the Northeast. And the eastern racer. The eastern racer, they're a little, they have a sick little method what they do. They like to raid newly born rattlesnakes. And what they'll do is they go to each one, grab it by the head, then they'll jerk their head around until the neck snaps. Then they'll go to the next one, the next one, the next one. And they'll do that to all of them, and then they'll go and suck them all down like spaghetti. I love black races, but they're pretty vicious to our venomous snakes. Okay, timber rattlesnakes live according to a strict activity cycle. All right, every part of that cycle is essential for their survival. All right, it starts with emergence. Egress, foraging, shedding, mating, and plumation. I'll get into all of those. Okay, during emergence, that's when rattlesnakes move up from the dens and come to the surface. Some will hang out for a couple of weeks, and a lot of the older, the more experienced snakes, they'll emerge and just leave immediately. For all the snakes at this point, thermal regulation, warming up is a priority for them. Here's an example of a emerging rattlesnake. Note this little action going on around the mouth and the pit. I'll talk about that a little later. That's a huge problem with the rattlesnakes in the Northeast. Here's more healthy looking emerging rattlesnakes sharing the same den entrance. You can tell these are pretty ones. These are ones that are from hilly areas. All right, egress. Egress is when the rattlesnakes leave the den site. They usually will head towards the basking site, not too far by, usually within 200 or 300 yards from the den is where they look for basking sites at. And they may spend a week or two. And they use these sites, again, they're multifunction, and they use them for birthing, shedding, digesting as well. All right, here's some timber rattlesnakes basking. This is a morning when it was, the day before was only 55 and raining. And this day it was like 62 and overcast. But these mothers, they're getting ready to give birth. They need all the heat they can get. So they're right out there in the open. All these are pregnant rattlesnakes. And also it makes them very vulnerable. Someone could come up there with a bag and a hook and just take them all, or with a shotgun and take them all out in one shot. And that's the way things used to be, and maybe still are to some extent. But me, I just took some nice pictures and I'm happy with these. When snakes egress, they use migration corridors. They're pretty much used annually, and they're marked with scent trails. So they use their sense of smell to find their way around on these scent trails. And that's what takes them, the scent trails basically take them everywhere they go. Leads them to their basking sites, leads them to the foraging grounds, to mating areas, and it takes them back to the den at the end of the year. And generally they do kind of like a teardrop movement where they go around one end, then they come around the other at the end of the year. All right, during these, while in the migration corridors, the timber rattlesnakes may stop for a week or more. And they generally will coil up pretty much in the open, maybe near a rock or a bush or under a tree, but they're away from any kind of hole to escape, which makes them vulnerable. It also makes them very easy to photograph. They don't rattle. They just sit there and hope that they're not being seen. So they're great to photograph at this point when they're like this. And timber rattlesnakes are practical. They use the easiest routes they can. They generally have a den, either at the bottom of the ledge. So they don't try climbing up the ledge. They'll either go around the ledge area, or if there's a drawer or a chute that makes an easy way up the ledge, they'll go up that way. But they usually do go up slope. So here's an example of rattlesnake on a migration stopover. The snake spent at least a week in this one spot. I took this picture probably the first day I saw it. By the 7th day, the top of its head was covered with little particles of wood from this decaying tree. It was kind of funny. All right, foraging is another part of the activity cycle. that kind of goes on and off throughout the year because other things interrupt it. But rattlesnakes are primarily sit and wait ambush predators. What they do is generally they use their senses to determine where there's avenues where rodents are coming through, and they'll post themselves right there. And they may wait for a day or a week until something comes by. And they often position themselves next to upright trees or down trees or rocks, berry bushes. And once they strike at a prey, the prey often scampers away because they don't die instantaneously. So the snake must track them down. Here's an example of foraging posture. Sometimes it's sprawled out like this one is. Other times they curl up. But notice how its head is pointing at the top of the log. That's because things like chipmunks and other rodents will often run right across there. And this one probably picked up a scent trail of rodent using this log. So this one is just waiting. You might wait there for days. This is a nice black phase from the hilly area. Here's another example of foraging posture. Snakes also have to shed their skin. It's called ecthesis, but we'll just call it shedding. That happens twice a year, once or twice a year, almost always in June or early July, and sometimes again in August. When timber rattlesnakes go to shed, they often return to the basking site for this, and they'll join the pregnant females and hang out at the basking site until it's time to shed. And usually the sheds are just strewn across bushes, laying around. When I find them, I pick them up and get rid of them so people don't see them. When snakes are in shed, their eyes, the base of the rattle, sometimes around the face and belly, turn milky blue. This hinders their eyesight, and because of that, they're vulnerable and also very defensive. I take extra care around snakes that are in shed for that reason. And here's an example. Milky eyes. This one's got blue all around the mouth, the blue on the belly, and the rattle. The base of the rattle actually often turns blue before the eyes do. So this is a pre-shed snake. Whoops. Here's a post-shed snake. This snake is the same color variation, but notice the difference. The difference a shed can make. They often, when they're freshly shed, they have beautiful iridescence, as you can kind of see on the head of this one right here. But they're so beautiful once they shed, especially the black ones, because the iridescence stick out. Mating. Of course, mating is an essential part of their activity cycle. The problem with timber rattlesnakes and their survival is that they are very slow to mature sexually. It takes about six years before they're able to mate. And they only mate 2 or 3 times in their entire lifetime. So there's not a lot of output when it comes to newborns. Mating season usually runs from July to early September. And males often return to basking sites to in search of receptive females. The basking sites are like beacons for everything except for foraging. There's so many scent trails that run through the basking sites. There's so many snakes are running through there. It's a natural place for snakes to go to look for another. Competing males may engage in a combat dance. I've never experienced this myself. It's one of the things I've been waiting to see. But I do have a video from somebody else on YouTube that I'm going to share. Oh, the purpose of the combat dance is for one snake to use its body to pin the other to the ground. The snake that does that gets the girl, so to speak. Okay, so there's a little case of what a combat dance is like. All right, timber rattlesnake reproduction. The females, after mating, the females retain the sperm over winter. And the following spring, they move to the birthing rookeries. It's at that point where ovulation occurs. And at that point, also, females are considered gravid. So we don't use the term pregnant because a pregnancy ovulation happens pretty much immediately. But here, the sperm is stored, and that's what makes them gravid. All right. Gravid females remain at the rookeries at the basking sites all season with the one goal of thermoregulating and incubating for the babies to be born in time where they can get a meal and get to the den. They don't take a meal either, by the way. The females may take a meal at the very end of the season, but they go all summer, all spring without a meal. And congregating females, gravid females, are very vulnerable. I showed you the photo of those snakes out in the open basking. That's exactly why they're vulnerable. Anyone could, or anything could really do some damage to snakes laying around like that. Birthing. Birthing is my favorite part of the year. I wait all year for birthing. Most of birthing happens during the first half of September. Usually the first week is the big week. Sometimes the last week of August might have a little bit of birthing as well. And the second week of September. But anything after like the third week of September, then the snakes are running into danger of not getting to the dens in time. Rattlesnakes give birth to, I wrote a half dozen here. I would say a half dozen to a dozen live young per year. And the babies are called neonates. And those neonates and the mother usually attempt to get a meal before going to the dens. However, the babies are born, a little trick of Mother Nature, they're born with fat deposits in their tail, which helps them to survive in case they do not take the meal. Of course, the neonates have a high mortality rate. Not only do they may not get to the den in time, but the list of predators that can prey upon them is much longer than that of adult rattlesnake. Black racer, for example, isn't going to mess with an adult rattlesnake. Will eat a whole litter of babies in one meal. And other smaller like possums and raccoons may take out some neonates. Here's a picture of a freshly shed neonate. They usually shed within a week, 5 to 7 days of being born. And notice the cute little button. The early stage of a rattle. At this point, it won't make any noise. It just looks cute. But it's totally armed with venom, and little ones tend to be more bitey than the adults, in my experience. So they look cute, but All right, so here's a video I took last year, again in my Appalachian area. This video is of 3 new mothers and their litters, and the thing here is again, the GoPro throws off our heat signature, and they feel that, so they don't come out too much. But you'll notice all the tongue flicking, and there's a couple times they open their jaws. Just you can see them open their jaws real quick, and all the tongue flicking stuff is all in response to the GoPro. So here we go. Oh, it's time lapse too. So this is the mother of one of them right there. And there's also some up here crawling around. See, they're really flicking their tongue at the GoPro. I'm not present at this point, so it's just a GoPro they're flicking at. Okay. Okay, the last leg of the activity cycle is ingress. Ingress is when the snakes start heading back to the den to get ready to hibernate for another long New England or mid-Atlantic winter, in your case. Ingress usually occurs throughout October, but the most active time is the first half of October. Some of the older, more experienced snakes may come in later, like early November. The younger snakes And snakes that just mated tend to come in early, like mid to late September. And again, they use the scent-laden migration corridors to find their way back home. And as in the spring, when they emerge, once at the den, the snakes may take a week or two to bask if the weather is suitable. And the other ones, the experienced ones that come home in November, they just drop in and don't come back up until springtime. So here's a couple of photos. Here we have a yellow phase rattlesnake in a migration corridor. This one is heading towards the den. And this is how they typically are in the migration corridors, just curl up under a little cover, but nowhere really to go to if they really needed to get away. And this one on the right is a black phase rattlesnake. This one is at the den, enjoying a little early November sunshine from the safety of a vertical ledge fracture. All right, we generally use the term hibernation, but the technical term is brumate. And timber rattlesnakes generally, they brumate below the frost line, which up here is about a meter or so. As opposed to hibernation, brumation is a deep lethargy. So they mostly just kind of heavily sedated, whereas hibernation is actually a deep sleep. And in the hibernaculums, the rattlesnakes actually move around, some movement. They're awake and they're not sleeping, and that's the distinction. Most of us just use hibernation for simplicity's sake. Snakes that are in the den, they don't feel the short-term temperature variances at the ground level. So say in December, you have 3 days of 70s, you might be thinking, oh, wow, let's go see some snakes. But they're not going to feel that temperature change. They might, some snakes, they're not down all the way, like sick snakes. The ones that are sick may not go down all the way, and those snakes may come up, but generally they're not going to feel any 70-degree temperatures when they're in the den. All right, just shift gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about timber rattlesnakes' history of persecution. Of course, the rattlesnakes have taken a beating over the last few hundred years since the Europeans came to America. And it started right from the beginning with the arrival of the Puritans in Massachusetts. The population that my imperiled population that I spent a lot of time at is right outside of Boston. And it's probably the most longest persecuted population of rattlesnakes in the country, because straight from the early 1600s to the mid 1900s, they were trying to kill the snakes at this location. And like probably Maryland and a lot of states along the East Coast, bounties were paid until the 1960s and 70s in some states. In some of these states, they had the bounties until they were almost wiped out. Then they would state list them and protect them after the fact. Some states still do roundups. Pennsylvania has a hunting season, actually, where they permit people to take one rattlesnake per year. Rattlesnakes have been eliminated from Canada, Maine, Delaware, and my state, Rhode Island. Conservation status of rattlesnakes is in the Northeast. They are state listed everywhere except for Pennsylvania, where they still have large numbers and enough where they have a hunting season, apparently. Everywhere else, they're state listed, and as such, it is illegal to kill, harass, or pursue them. And I put those words in quotes because those are the words that are most often used in the letter of the law. Now, kill is pretty black and white, but harass and pursue is pretty gray. Taking a picture of a rattlesnake on the side of a trail and it's rattling at you, well, that could be construed as harassment. Or, chasing one up a hill or looking for a den, that's all considered pursuing. So it's pretty shade gray, and they choose their definitions. All right, even though most of the poaching is done timber rattlesnakes, there's still major threats to their survival. Probably the worst one is development habitat loss. And this is why the Appalachians is their safe haven in the East Coast, because you can't build developments or shopping centers on mountains. That's the saving grace of the timber rattlesnake, I think. Also, highways and roads. Highways and roads box off their habitat, their natural areas. It fragments them. It also prevents them from reaching out to other populations for healthy breeding. Instead, what they do is breed inwards. They breed with themselves. And that's because of that creates the genetic isolation. In New Hampshire, they actually had inbreeding sickness, where the rattlesnakes, some of them are being born with pink tongues, where rattlesnakes have black tongues. And they're also coming out with what's called a piebald pattern. And that's these just irregular white blotches that show up on snakes. It's kind of a popular thing in the pet trade with ball pythons and such. But in the wild, it's just a sign of inbreeding sickness because the snakes are breeding within the same den. And also, to a lesser extent in the past, there's still people out there killing snakes or taking them to sell. And if you Google timber rattlesnake for sale, you'll find plenty of ads out there for them. And a relatively new problem over the last decade and a half is disease. Here's an example of the roadkill. We probably have 2 or 3 in my Boston area every year. And they had gates to close the roads, but they just stopped doing it. So the disease is called snake fungal disease. And it's called by a fungus. And I'll just say we'll call it OO to keep it simple. It's a fatal disease. It affects rat snakes, milk snakes, Massasaugas terribly, but it does a hell of a job on these timber rattlesnakes as well. This is probably maybe a moderate case, but this snake is terminal all the same. You notice that what the fungus does, it attacks all the open orifices that are moist. So it goes right for the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the pit. Everything the snake needs to survive, it attacks. So this snake here, it's lost its eye, it has a nostril for now, but it lost its pit. Its throat is all full of lesions, so it probably can't swallow. And notice the venom gland over here. Instead of going all the way back being full of venom, it's kind of choked off by scars. So even if it is functional, it only stores a fraction of the venom. So snakes like this have virtually no chance of surviving. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the last rattlesnake population in my state. And I'm going to tell you about it because the same story has taken place in your state and every other state, probably on the East Coast, with its timber rattlesnakes. Same story, different place, basically. So our last population was located in Tiverton, Rhode Island, suburban place. But the rattlesnakes were locked in a little hilly area that was only like a mile wide and 2 miles long. But increasing development, roads, killing and poaching led to its extirpation or local being wiped out. And the state didn't end the bounty. There was a bounty through this whole time, and the state didn't end the bounty, and the state listed the timber rattlesnakes until they were already gone. So they're all gone, then let's protect them now. It's basically what my state and other states' philosophy has been. So this is the area. And again, this is happening all over. The rattlesnakes have been diminished. They lived in this, and excuse these little icons, these are something else. So they lived in this little area right here. This is like a hill. There's a denning area here, denning area here. But look at all the development. They had nowhere to go. They're trapped in this area. And the hunters lived all around here, especially this top road. This is where the main hunter lived. So these snakes can't go out. The nearest population is in Boston, 60 miles away. So these snakes have nothing. They couldn't do anything. They're stuck there. So every area that had rattlesnakes, hunters had their well-known most notorious hunters. In my state, the guy was called Frank Manchester, and he lived on Bulgamarsh Road. That was the road that goes across the north of that area I just showed you. So he just, went out of his house and went down the hill. He hunted rattlesnakes at the dens and basking sites through the whole frontal. And he almost single-handedly eliminated all the females of that population because he knew where the rookeries were, and he's smart. He wanted the money to get the dollar per rattle. So he went to the rookeries, killed the females along with their babies, and eventually there were no females left. So the population was effectively dead. So he claimed to have killed between 12 and 1,500 rattlesnakes over a 50-year period. And he claimed his best year of killing 371 snakes in a single year. So it must have been quite a population in that little area. So the last confirmed sighting in this area was one that was killed by a state trooper in 1966. The state trooper, I'm sure, is very proud of himself. And this is Frank Manchester. He would keep some snakes in the cage right here in his neighborhood. And for a nickel, he would poke at the snakes so they would rattle a little bit. So that was like the neighborhood entertainment at the expense of the snakes. He's dead now. Conservation strategies. So there are some conservation strategies in place with mixed results. One of them is nighttime road closures. This is pretty important since the males especially, well, first of all, all of them are active hunters at night, but the males during the summer are also out looking for mates. So they're crossing roads. The problem with that is that politics. People use these roads, especially around Boston, to cut through the main arteries that go to Boston, cut right through the snake area. And when the road is closed, they freak out. They cry to their their representatives. And what happened is no more road closures. People's shortcut comes first, which is a shame. Another strategy that I believe in, but it's not done in too many areas, is just closing off and monitoring the critical areas. Connecticut is one state that does this. And what they do is they put signs up around den areas, basking areas that say the area is closed from April 15th to October 15th, which is basically the timber rattlesnakes active season. And they also put cameras up. In the areas where there's rattlesnakes in Connecticut too, the neighbors pay attention to out-of-state cars. So it's like they see a car from Rhode Island and Connecticut, this area that middle of nowhere is only with rattlesnakes. They'll call up about that to say this guy doesn't belong here. Public awareness is also important. Rattlesnakes aren't held in high esteem by very many people at all. And in my experience, they've buckled against any attempts at conservation with rattlesnakes. This includes restocking. Restocking would be a good option. Massachusetts tried stocking a mountain that's in a reservoir a mile away from shore, and the people didn't want it. So it was big meetings, and they weren't into it. They just didn't want anything about stocking snakes. It got so bad where the governor had made a televised promise not to stock rattlesnakes anywhere, unfortunately. Now, head starting is another program that's being used pretty widespread now. And that's where we capture gravid snakes and we let them give birth indoors. And both the mother is given a year or two to recover and get healthy, and the babies are given a chance to get bigger so they're healthier and have less predators to worry about. Then we let them go at a den site after a couple of years. And I've seen head start snakes 4 or 5 years afterwards. They've been known to mate. So it seems like a very successful thing so far. One thing I noticed about the head start is that the snakes seem a little more used to people. They're not as defensive when encountered in the wild. I think that's because they've been, with humans for 2 years before being released. So these were some breeders used for that were slated for a restocking project. But then the governor made that promise, and we had to let these snakes go in the woods. And these are head starts from a few years ago. These snakes are in the wild right now. Hopefully a few of them are still surviving. The future outlook for timber rattlesnakes, well, in the south, in the Appalachians, they're more or less stable, but in the north, they're still declining. In New England, we have 12 populations. One of them is two of them in the mountains. All the rest are imperiled and not expected to last over the last 100 years, the next 100 years. A recent study projected that those will all be gone within 100 years' time, except for the Appalachian snakes. The end. So I'd like to take some questions. So I just not sure how to do that
here. Hey, John, you can just check the chat. You have the chat box open that people, if they have questions, they'll ask in there. I've answered a few. We've had a few as we went along. I've answered some of it, but yeah, one thing I wanted to comment on is a lot of this Northeast states, up until like the 1960s, were paying people to kill these snakes. There were bounties on these snakes. So
that motivated a lot of guys, a lot of people to that was like a full-time job. The guy I talked about, that was his thing. I'm glad those days are
people
gone.
actually made a living killing these snakes.
Yeah, it's amazing. $1 a rattle.
Hey, John.
Hi.
Do you mind stop sharing and we can come back together for questions and see everyone's lovely faces?
Okay.
All right. May I ask
a questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I live in Maryland. My name's Kimberly, and I was hiking in Black Rock. It's sort of west of Thurmont near Catoctin State Park. And I'd never seen a rattlesnake in my life. And I was walking like a mile up, and all of a sudden I had some earbuds on, and I heard this big and I thought it was my earbuds. And I stopped, which was the worst thing I could ever do, right? And then I took them out, and I heard it again, and I could tell, and I looked down, and I was almost frozen in fear. And all of a sudden, I probably did the even worse thing. I jumped off really fast, and because it was in the round circle like that, with its head just like this going. And I was like,
it can be pretty intimidating. Rattle or no rattle, just when they get in that position, that strike position, if you keep yourself a body length away, they can never reach you. That's why I say to people, safe distance is body length.
This far away from me.
Oh, you really? See, it didn't strike you. That's testament to that's good testament to the demeanor. It didn't strike at you.
Oh.
But I can imagine what it felt like.
So, oh my gosh. So yeah, so I was by myself, and I'm not a very big person, so I probably wouldn't have made it off the mountain if he bit me. And so I looked up, and it said, "What can you do?" And Google said, "There's nothing you can do because snake bite kits don't work." So
yeah, there's not much. There's anti-venom, but it's like really expensive, like $10,000 a vial. Usually people need multiples.
So you'd probably die. So I don't think I'll ever go hiking by myself again. But that was very
in the mountains. It's dangerous.
Pardon me?
It can be a little dangerous to go by yourself in the mountains.
But
plus, it's beer.
I'm from New England, so I live here now, and I love the Shenandoahs. But that experience really. That's why I thought you were going to have like how to avoid them or how to get away or whatever. But when you were showing these pictures, I was getting PTSD.
Oh, No, I don't think really is the need to feel that way, because generally, like I said, they almost always try to get away before it gets to that point. And I totally get that, but when you're around them all the time, I'm more comfortable a foot away from a rattlesnake than a foot away from a person.
But anyway,
Thanks for sharing that experience. I'm sure it'll stay with you for a long time.
Yes.
Hey, John, I just say, if you've never been buzzed by a rattlesnake, that should be, I don't want to encourage people to get close to venomous snakes, but that's the first time I was buzzed by a timber rattlesnake was like, wow. And yeah, I kept my distance and everything, but they're not aggressive. It was trying to get away from me, it's
Yeah, sure.
leave me alone, get away from me, basically. And of course I'm a photographer, so I'm like, oh no,
yeah.
get a picture of you. But
But
yeah,
just knowing that they do that, they try to get away.
Yeah.
Again, it says something about the
Absolutely.
demeanor. And that's what they want to do all the time, is try to get away.
So we have another question. What is the lifespan of the timber rattlesnake?
Timber rattlesnakes can live up to 20 years or more, even longer in captivity.
Like, how's the Maryland population doing? Is it declining or stable?
I believe they're state endangered. The only place where they live in decent numbers is the Appalachian Mountains. Everything east of there, they've been either never existed or they've been wiped out completely. So they're probably in healthy numbers in the mountains, but that's about it. Everywhere else, not too much. And the same thing here, up in New England, the mountains, the only place where they have healthy numbers. In the hills, they've been wiped out. Everywhere people can develop and wiped out, but you can't develop the mountains, so they're usually doing pretty good there.
Do we have any other questions? Anybody?
Have you ever seen a piebald one?
I haven't. There's only one location that has that, and that's New Hampshire. And their population, they only have literally one den. It's not even a population, it's just one den with 35 snakes. And it this, because there's no other dens, they mate with each other. So they get really inbred really quick. And that's how the piebald, I've never seen it, but I've seen pictures of it. Same with the pink tongue.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to mention something. I haven't seen many of the eastern timbers. Most of the ones that I've seen have been either around Illinois in the north.
Yeah, I'd like to see some of those western ones.
Yeah, and they were all pretty. But the ones that I saw down in Oklahoma, they were the yellow phase, but they were these yellow. It was almost like the McDonald's yellow. The whole snake was that way.
Really?
And the chevrons were like real faint, kind of grayish little markings. It's a very striking snake to see. And then the ones that I've seen down in Missouri, southern Illinois, that was the larger populations that I've seen down there. And they're pretty spectacular. But
even Tennessee too.
Yeah,
Western
I've never
Tennessee,
seen the Tennessee one.
Arkansas.
But when I was going to tell that lady that we jumped in there, and I have never, of all the poisonous snakes that I've seen, and I've seen almost all of them.
Oh, good for you. I'm still working on my list.
But most of them are really pretty inhibited to strike, I would say. You'd almost have to get like really close with a, like less than a foot or so. And if you were a little bit farther back from that, and I'm talking about even some of these larger, reasonably aggressive, and I say that just because if they're cornered, they tend to move towards you a little bit, but they're really still trying to escape.
Well, a lot of snakes, like Western diamondbacks, prairie rattlesnakes, are often caught in the open.
Yeah.
Where there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So they have no other option except for to go right to the strikey attitude.
But they don't
rattlesnakes,
they don't move like the racers or the coach whips do,
No.
where they'll really move kind of quick. These guys are moving relatively slow. So I think if you could just get over the trauma of hearing that rattle, and then if you
Yeah.
look at them and be respectful and then just back off slowly, you can spend ridiculous amounts of time with some of these and be in no danger at all.
That's
So
great
it's,
that you realized that. I wish more people would. I'm real so comfortable around them. Like I could take a picture of one and not even pay attention to the ones around me because I know what they're gonna do. They're gonna get away. You know,
when I was in Nebraska, I was taking this mammalogy class, and we had this instructor who wanted to demonstrate how to catch little mice. So we had these little traps, these foldable traps. So we had all of us, the graduate students, dancing around this one little area, setting up these traps, putting the oats in them, and he was taking all these pictures. So we get back to the university. This is in Halsey National Forest in central Nebraska. And then when we get back to the school, he's going to show us these pictures that he had. And all of us have real good vision. We can spot snakes pretty easy. So in all these pictures, you can see all of our hands moving the little collapsible trap around. And there's this prairie rattlesnake, couldn't have been maybe a foot behind that. And his head and his tongue is flicking. But we were all focused on the actual trap. And none of us knew that there was a snake even there.
Oh, that's
so
funny.
that's how cryptic some of them can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good times though.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
There's a question that if the snakes are so plentiful in PA, why don't they relocate them to other states and populations?
Oh yeah, I saw that. That comes down to law and politics. First of all, snakes don't generally take snakes from other states. And also states don't do it, and for individuals to do it, it would be a violation of the interstate commerce clause for one thing. For private individuals to try to take upon themselves, conservation measures like introducing snakes or stocking snakes on their own. Those can lead to multiple felonies. I've considered myself, why not go to Pennsylvania or get my license for one, but I'm pretty sure you have to kill them. And plus that would be interstate commerce going across states. So it's not really feasible. And again, there's not much support for timber rattlesnake conservation amongst the constituency of these New England states. The people just don't want to do it.
John, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining me.
And it was it was an incredible presentation. You spoke with authority, and what made it so good is that you had a life that gave you that privilege of being an authority. And
it's a privilege to work with these snakes, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, you're the real deal when it comes to understanding at least the snake you talked about. You said so much, and I couldn't keep up with it, but that in general, you were giving advice and people were talking about how there's a way when you come across snakes, if you take the position that the snake really doesn't want to engage, it would like to just, leave, give it a way out kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, a number of years ago, I started deciding that it was time for me to do walkabout. I did it alone and I went to Belize, and I'll skip all the details. I found out about something the locals called the leaping Tommy Gopher, which is the fertile nonce. It has,
yes.
And it was at a time where my first stopover was at the Belize Zoo before I went on, I just had a backpack and walked around Belize. And
I'm sorry,
That
where's
was the
police?
year, I guess. That was the year that there was going to be a anti-snake, something to take that was going to be, as you said, thousands of dollars. Somebody said thousands of dollars. But it was after a hurricane, and so the soil was very wet. And I remember walking from one village that was Creole to another village that was Garifuna. And as I'm walking in the, it's wet on the ground. And I kept saying to myself, leaping Tommy Gopher, their MO is they will stand still and fight. I mean, they will, if you go around a corner somewhere, they might come out leaping and attacking you. The only actual physical experience I had with one was with a very young one where I was staying in a campsite. And as I was being jocular about, oh, isn't that cute? It was, I was reminded that the young ones don't know not to strike. They're very aggressive.
Sure, yeah. I think
Anyhow,
young rattlesnakes.
Your whole presentation brought back memories, and that's my own very limited experience with just being aware that I'm in snake country. So thank you again.
Thanks for sharing that experience.
Another question we have was, if they eat other snakes, why do they then nest with those other species they eat? Right? Why did the non-venomous snakes choose to nest with these ones that would eat them?
Oh, okay. Well, it's actually the non-venomous ones that do the eating of the venomous ones. And I've thought about this too. But the main predator snake is the black racer. And the black racer actually leaves the den earlier than the timber rattlesnakes and copperheads do. So by the time rattlesnakes and copperheads emerge, the main snake-eating snake, the black racer, is gone already, because they mate in April, and the rattlesnakes don't usually emerge until mid-May. So the main threat is gone already, doing this mating thing. So it's just a matter of timing. Though black racers are kind of known to hang out the den early to wait for the babies to come. So, I mean.
Does anybody else have any questions? Anybody?
Someone asked about copperheads given live birth, Jay Crothers. Yes, they do. Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yeah.
Copperheads do give live birth. Pretty much the same thing as rattlesnakes. Kind of congregate, but maybe not in as big numbers. And they give birth in September to the neonates, and they all go to the den, just like same thing as rattlesnakes.
All right. If nobody else has any questions, John, we would like to thank you for this awesome presentation and giving your time. I definitely learned some things, and seeing your videos was really fantastic.
Thank you. I hope that made it a little more interesting than just my talking.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Bill.
Thank you. If you can even hear me.
Hi.
Hi. Computer shut off on me, so I lost the meeting.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.